The forest swallowed the last trace of daylight as Anders Voss stepped out of his truck, boots sinking into the soft earth beside the house he hadn't seen since childhood. The old place leaned into the shadows like a wounded animal, porch sagging, roof bowed, windows blind with dust thick enough to hide decades of silence. Coda, his late wife's dog, padded ahead with cautious curiosity, nose twitching at the dense bamboo crowding around the house like a living barricade. Anders wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here because grief had become too heavy to carry anywhere else. 2 years after Sylvia's death, he'd sold his business, abandoned his routines, and driven into the forest with nothing but tools, canned food, and the kind of pain that made a man believe solitude was the only way to breathe. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of wet timber and time, but it felt honest. No condolences, no questions, no expectations. Just walls that had watched a different man, his grandfather Otto, vanish from this place without explanation 60 years earlier. As Anders explored the creaking rooms, each step stirred up dust and memory, but it was the bedroom floor that stopped him cold. One board buckled beneath his boot, its looseness hinting at something hidden beneath. He knelt, pried it up, and the lantern light revealed a small oilcloth bundle tucked between the joists. The fabric cracked like old skin as he unwrapped it, revealing letters tied with a faded ribbon, photographs curling at the edges, and a silver locket that felt impossibly warm in his trembling palm. This house wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting. He sat on the wooden floor as the night pressed against the walls, reading the first letter with breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was written in a delicate hand, Astrid Bergman, and the first line alone shattered everything he believed about his grandfather's disappearance. My dearest Otto, 3 days apart, and it feels like a year. Affection, longing, fear. Each sentence painted a forbidden love story that unfolded between Otto and a married woman, a love powerful enough to defy the village, the era, and every moral boundary the Voss family had clung to. As he read letter after letter, Anders felt the years peel back, sneaking meetings, whispered promises, and then the devastating reveal. Astrid was pregnant. Otto's child. A child born into secrecy, protected fiercely by a mother terrified of the consequences. The photographs deepened the blow. One showed Otto younger than Anders had ever seen him. Another showed Astrid, dark-haired and beautiful in a quietly sorrowful way. The last photograph showed 3 people at a village festival, Astrid, Otto, and her husband Lars, a tense triangle captured in a single frame. Anders's pulse hammered hard enough to drown out the wind outside. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a fracture that had rippled down generations, shaping men who fled, families that hardened, and a legacy of silence that had reached all the way into Anders's own life. His grief, his retreat, his disappearance from his children, it all mirrored Otto's vanishing like an echo across time. The floorboard creaked under him, the forest whispered beyond the windows, and in the hush of that abandoned house, Anders realized he wasn't here to escape. He was here to uncover the truth. The next morning, armed with the letters, Coda at his side, and an ache in his chest that felt newly awakened rather than dulled, Anders drove into Pinewood, the village his grandfather once called home. The town looked suspended in time, all weather-beaten storefronts and peeling paint, life moving slow enough to hear your own heartbeat. At the village hall, the clerk, an elderly woman named Ingrid, froze when he mentioned Otto's name. Something like recognition or warning passed through her gaze. She brought out a registry book thick with yellowed pages, and as her finger traced the lines of births, marriages, and deaths, Anders watched his family history tilt into a new shape. Astrid had indeed given birth to a boy named Johan. Lars, her husband, died months later in what the village whispered wasn't quite an accident. And then Astrid vanished. But the most jarring discovery came from Ingrid's hesitant confession. Your grandfather left suddenly after Lars died. People talked, but nothing was ever proven. Anders's mind spun. Flight, fear, protection, guilt. Otto didn't just abandon his family. He ran from something that might have destroyed all of them. Driving back to the forest house, Anders felt the engine vibrate under a storm of thoughts. But the blow that truly splintered him came later when Freya's package arrived. Old letters and photographs from his grandmother Helen's belongings. One loose picture showed two children, his father as a toddler and another boy slightly older with solemn eyes. The back read, "Our new son." Adoption papers confirmed it. Johann Hoffmann had been absorbed into the Voss fam. Renamed but never embraced, Anders gripped the papers until his knuckles whitened. Astrid's child had been hidden in plain sight. A brother his father grew up beside but never acknowledged. And a man somewhere out there, his uncle, living with answers no one ever gave him. Finding Johan, now Jan, felt like chasing the ghost of someone who'd spent his entire life trying not to exist. The address Anders located belonged to a modest cottage 3 hours away, the kind of home belonging to a man who'd learned to shrink himself into quiet corners. Anders didn't storm the door. He wrote a letter, honest, raw, offering truth instead of demands. Jan called days later, voice wary, fragile, and old in a way that had nothing to do with age. "I don't know why I'm calling," he said, "except you said you found her letters." When Jan arrived at the forest house, he stood frozen on the porch, a grown man returned to a childhood he barely understood. He touched the railing, the door frame, the walls. Inside the master bedroom, he knelt beside the floorboards where Astrid hid her letters, tracing the grooves as if her fingerprints might still be there. When Anders placed the locket in his hands, Jan's breath left him in a broken sob. Seeing his infant face beside Otto's photograph crumbled 40 years of self-loathing in an instant. All his life he believed he was unwanted, abandoned, a burden. But as he read Astrid's trembling words, fear, love, hope, his shoulders shook with the truth. He had been cherished, hidden not because of shame, but because of danger. Anders and Kieran stayed beside him as he wept, the house no longer empty but filled with the sound of long-buried grief breaking open. In that moment, the walls no longer felt haunted. They felt alive. Truth never arrives alone. It drags every buried answer behind it. With Freya's relentless search skills and Jan's fragmented memories, they traced Astrid's final steps to a coastal town called Fair Haven. The medical archive smelled of paper and dust, but inside one thin file, Astrid's last year unfolded in devastating clarity. She'd been dying of tuberculosis, too poor to be treated, too desperate to keep her son safe. Her final months were spent working in a boarding house, coughing blood, refusing hospitalization because she had no one else to care for Johan. The final note in her chart broke them all. Patient agreed to allow adoption placement rather than have child enter foster system. Patient expired June 3, 1968. She didn't abandon her son. She saved him with her last breath. At the cemetery's potter's field, they found her grave, a patch of grass marked only by a number. Jan collapsed to his knees, sobbing into the earth that held the mother he never truly got to know. Anders knelt beside him, then Freya, then Kieran. A circle of family formed around a woman who had died alone, forgotten by the world, but loved fiercely by the boy now grieving over her. They held a small memorial right there, words trembling, hands clasped, hearts cracked open. And in that moment, Astrid was no longer a ghost. She was seen. She was acknowledged. She was home. Healing has a way of widening the path beneath your feet. As they restored the house, fixing walls, smoothing floors, reclaiming spaces where generations had stayed silent, they uncovered the truth about Otto's later life. He hadn't vanished into nothing. He'd remarried in Nevada, built a quiet existence, and fathered a daughter named Sarah. Another branch of the family tree no one had spoken of. When Freya contacted her, Sarah responded with cautious curiosity that softened into tears as she learned the truth. Her father had carried sorrow she never understood, a lingering grief, a hollow space in him she could never fill because it belonged to the family he left behind. She visited the forest house, stepping into the silence Otto once fled. Together, they completed the cradle Otto had begun carving for Jan 60 years earlier. 3 generations worked on it, Anders with steady hands, Kieran with creative spark, Jan with trembling reverence. When they were finished, the cradle glowed like something sacred, a bridge between lives fractured and mended. Sarah traced the carved edges with a trembling smile. "He would have wanted this," she whispered. And for the first time since Anders arrived, the house felt warm not from the lanterns or the fire, but from being lived in again. Time didn't erase pain. It didn't restore what was lost, but it did carve space for something new. 6 months after Anders first stepped onto the porch intending to disappear, the forest house throbbed with life. Relatives filled the rooms, Sarah's family, Stellan's children, Freya's partner, Kieran's laughter echoing through hallways once suffocated by grief. Jan had built a small cottage on the property, choosing to stay close to the family he'd once been taught to fear. Anders and Jan opened a woodworking shop together, reviving Otto's craft with pride. Instead of secrecy, photographs hung on the walls, Otto with Astrid, Astrid with Johan, Helen raising 2 boys, Sarah with her father, Sylvia holding baby Freya. No more hidden history, no more shame. During their first full family dinner, Anders rose from his chair, hands trembling but voice steady as he thanked his children for not giving up on him. He honored Sylvia's last wish, that he live, not disappear. And he acknowledged Otto and Astrid's love, imperfect, forbidden, but real enough to echo across generations. Glasses lifted, voices joined, family broken, rebuilt, and breathing again. When night settled softly over the bamboo grove, Anders stepped out onto the porch where this entire journey began. Coda curled at his feet, older now but still faithful, still watching him like he was worth saving. Jan joined him, leaning against the railing, eyes warm instead of haunted. Inside, the house glowed with laughter, Freya telling stories, Sarah sharing memories, Kieran pouring drinks, the cradle in the corner catching lamplight like a symbol of everything they'd reclaimed. Anders breathed in the cool forest air and felt something he once believed he'd never feel again. Peace, not because life was perfect, but because truth had finally replaced silence, connection had replaced distance, and love, messy, flawed, painful love, had stitched a shattered family back together. If this story reached you tonight, if you felt every heartbeat in it, every loss, every discovery, every moment of healing, then stay with us. Join this channel, support these narratives, and be part of stories that remind us how deeply human we all are. Like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. And before you go, tell me in the comments, Where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now?